the wilderness can seem like a place where you have no identity, where actually there's nothing there, because wilderness sounds like this empty, vacuous space. But actually, the wilderness, the exile, is where you discover what it really means to be you as a people.
For instance, Pink's lyrics in one of her songs, I don't know where I'm going far from here. That should be enough. Just knowing that this is no longer enough.
I think the exodus is necessary because it's where we discover what we really are and who we really are.
Pre-colonialization, we were flourishing civilizations that were thought leaders. We were spiritual, scientific, astrological leaders in the way that history has been built.
You know, there's white supremacy and black and brown inferiority. So in order for that white supremacy to continue, it relies on black people believing that they are inferior, that they are not leaders, that they are not good enough. There
was a guy called Yusuf Jallo, the Cowfoot Prince. He's a griot from Sierra Leone, and one of the things he said is to live in the diaspora, we as black people are ultimately out of our minds.
And for me, that's the exodus. Understanding what it is that we are attached to as a people that we need to liberate ourselves from.
When you now have that sort of exodus regarding your mind, your body naturally wants to follow, because wherever the mind goes, the body goes, you know? I think our God is there in the space between, like, breathing in and breathing out, you know, like the in-between space. That is where our God resides. And this is why breath keeps being taken away from us, and we see videos that kind of traumatize us where breath is being taken for the final time, because that is where our God resides.
You know, part of the enslavement and oppression of black people was changing the narrative about who we were in relation to God. So, you know, Bibles were created and the Exodus narrative was taken out because people knew that if the enslaved read that, they would know that by the second book of the Bible, God was a liberator of the oppressed, and that was too powerful a narrative for the enslaved to have.
Audre Lorde talks about the fact that, you know, in this litany for survival, that we were never meant to survive. And that is that realization. When you hold on to that, you realize that every space between each breath is a victory.
One of the things I do often as a black person is ask God, you know, where were you when we were enslaved? Where were you when we were taken captive? Where were you when we were oppressed? You know, where were you for George Floyd? Where were you for Stephen Lawrence?
The reason that we say healing isn't linear is because healing doesn't stay trapped to one dimension or one timeline. So that means by the work that we are doing now, right now in this moment, having this conversation, an ancestor from 500 years ago could be receiving the energy of that healing, because somewhere in their God self, somewhere within them, in their spirit that doesn't know time or space, they know that something has been healed. Possibilities are endless, but that collective force, we'd be able to imagine and realize and manifest so much that is for our own good. Like you'd see in terms of community, who would be starving when we are no longer buying into capitalist ideologies of, oh, well, you know, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. You know, the collective power would mean that even reclaiming, for instance, the continent of Africa and being able to realign what the soil and what the environment can provide to something that benefits us as a whole, while telling the people who have, taken so much from it and given so little back to us, that they no longer have that power. It would also economically shift what's happening around the world. Stock markets, everything would fall. So what we know in the material sense would dissolve, and what we know in the spiritual sense, where we are all kind of spread out but we come together with it, would become more solid, more robust, and able to withstand pushback.
For example, we got the Black Pound concept. The reason why that is so powerful is that every other community does that than us, except for us. How long does a pound stay within your community? 6 hours, right? But you got to understand the supply chain. If we don't have those structures in place, this supply chain, then we can't be building ourselves up. And I feel like, again, being separate from other communities will allow us to build that up from scratch.
Our power would be immense, and that's what people are scared of. People who identify as women could express themselves freely. People who identify as men could express themselves freely without these useless binaries. And if somebody said, I actually just don't want any of the terms, they would be embraced and celebrated too within those dynamics.
Part of the limits of our sexual identity and part of the limits of how we understand gender are things that we have inherited because of how we understand God. That actually, as we've received it through whiteness, does to us is it puts everything into a binary. So life is much more complicated than that. We're all many things, right? And therefore, until our understandings of God become broader, I think our understandings of ourselves will be limited.
There are dances which are still around today which connect your mind, your body, and for example, your snake of life, your spine, your rear end is the moon, your chest is the sun, and a lot of the things that we see right now which have turned into things like twerking, which were originally celebrations of our cosmology within our body. So if we look at some of those things, we'll have a completely different perspective on what we, first of all, are kind of demonizing today, but then also celebrating that actually we were far beyond our years in terms of our connection to a godly power.
And I just want a world where Black girls and women aren't spending the majority of their time trying to heal from things that should have never happened in the first place. So I've always taken on a sort of like caregiving role. So from looking after my brothers to then, growing up, I think that those patterns then show themselves because then you then go looking for people that you need to then care for and look after, while resenting that because all you're looking really for is for somebody to look after you. So when Malcolm X says that the Black woman is the least protected in society, he wasn't lying. Like, he saw that, and we continue to see that. Who is out here protecting Black women?
Like, what if I was to sit there and be like, okay, cool, I don't like Black women. Why is that? Okay, I had a bad relationship with the Black women in my life. Which Black women in my life? My mother, my sister, my aunts. What made them a bad relationship? Oh, they were too hard, or maybe, which I'm finding a lot these days, which I think is mad, they expect too much of me, right? It's like, okay, cool. So why is it that I felt challenged in a negative way that someone expected or had high standards for me? I am a man, whether I define it or not. Like, I start there. Ultimately, I don't actually need to do anything to prove that. So if I'm a man who likes flowers, I'm a man who likes flowers. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, if I'm a man who is hella emotional, I'm hella emotional.
We talk about hyper-masculinity, is that men have been conditioned in society to believe that, they don't cry.
And that goes back to that whole thing of perception. We're meant to be unbreakable. We're meant to be, some version of what people understand as a savage in their mind,
We've emotionally stunted men, and then we're surprised when the way that they express themselves later is violent.
death has meant a kind of freedom that kind of saddens me in a sense. I think because it's, when I think about what death should mean in the Christian context, I think, you know, what we're promised in Christian faith is life before death, but actually, for so many of us as Black folk, life has been seen as starting at death. Even death has been shaped by white supremacy for us, because death has had to become a symbol of freedom. And I don't think it was meant to just be that. And there's an interesting thing there for me about, you know, whether we allow whiteness to shape our understandings and image of eternity. That if death is about freedom and release, then we have allowed whiteness to enter eternity for us.
Losing my nan was one of the hardest things that I've ever had to go through. And that kind of connection can never be replaced. Because, you know, everything that she was, I am. But what scares me the most is that so many Black people are now going. They're gone. And if us who are left don't have that connection anymore, does that mean that we're even more lost? Inevitably, though, I know one of my ancestors, and that's really beautiful to me. That all that history, all that love is inside of me, and that my nan is doing more as a spirit than she could ever do in this world. But we have to keep connected.
I often think of my ancestors, those people that decided that enough was enough and that they were gonna fight for their freedom. They were only able to get that liberation when they took the process of really understanding the value and dignity of their own lives and knowing that they deserved more, and how precious life is, knowing that they didn't want any more generations beyond them to experience what they experienced. That's what I'm talking about. And all it took was for one person or a group of people to say enough is enough, you know? But that took a sense of a real understanding of compassion for one's life. Because if they were not compassionate towards their own lives, then chattel slavery would still continue now. The transformation wasn't in the burning down of the plantations. The transformation was when they were in their huts or when they were on the fields and they were sat there and they were like, you know what? They're looking at the calluses on their hands. They're going through all the things that they've gone through in the day or whatever it is. And they said, no more. My life is worth more. And that's the transformation. I literally think that we are literally people of the earth. And within Buddhism, we say that we're chanting for bodhisattvas of the earth, so people who are protectors of the earth. When we chant, that's what we're asking for the people to rise up.
Bye.